we're out here. This is the field where the magic happens.
Benning Bites with Damon Benning. Benning Bites with Damon Benning.
Another episode of Benning Bites. Appreciate you being a part of what we do. Brought to you by Underdog Fantasy Sports. You can get them at the website, Underdog Fantasy Sports, or you can download the app. It's pretty slick. It's really slick, actually. Just make sure when you do, enter the promo code Benning. A little higher, a little lower. That's daily sports fantasy. If you're competitive and you like multiple sports, then Underdog Sports Fantasy is for you. Remember, promo code Benning, Benning. Really good show this morning. I think I can say that. Be objective. I'm in the middle of it. Really spirited stuff. Notre Dame, Ohio State, coaches that we would take, and the way too early top 25s as we talked to Bill Bender. And I'll be curious to get your folks' opinion in the morning. 888-638-4876. Do we still do this thing? You know, Ravi and I were talking about the expectations that come with preseason rankings. Is it pressure? Is it an advantage? Is it a disadvantage? And this is on the heels of how important is it to be ranked in the preseason if you want to be considered one of the teams that's there at the end with the 12 best. Is it more or less important? We've seen a huge push the last handful of years to do away with preseason rankings, as it tends to be less indicative of kind of the strength of schedule and what's happening in college football, with playing a different number of conference games, the out-of-conference games. How do we kind of weigh strength of schedules now? And without uniformity, it is kind of a crapshoot. So should we wait on preseason rankings to get a more accurate depiction of who's what? It's not going to happen anytime soon. I think you're going to have your preseason rankings, and you already have your way too early top 25s. You know, AP will come out with theirs, and the coaches' polls, they'll do theirs. And that does typically influence how we think about particular teams. Ravi brought up a couple good ones with UNLV and Illinois and Arizona State and some of these young teams that we aren't accustomed to seeing in the top 25. And I said, gosh, you know what would have been interesting if you'd have used Nebraska as an example, because that would be one where I kind of would have been into the argument of it can add to pressure. And I say all that to say, like, are we past the point, or are we in the middle of it, or what happens with the whole winning of the offseason thing and preseason rankings? I saw it on social media the last couple of days about how close Nebraska played Ohio State, and why wasn't that the same Ohio State team that we saw in the playoffs? And I get it, right? You want to do when we played them, and it can have some value depending on where you want to use yourself as a measuring stick, but so much happens during the course of a season, and when the stakes are seemingly at their highest versus, you know, a Saturday afternoon conference slate as a preeminent, or, you know, a huge favorite like Ohio State was against Nebraska, and all sorts of things go into gameplay when we want to compare and contrast. I mean, that certainly is not the same Notre Dame team that played Northern Illinois, and that Northern Illinois team was not the same team that played Miami of Ohio. And we know these things, but yet we still kind of allow ourselves to go through these what-if scenarios when people do forecasting and projecting. And I say all that to say you can only have so many kind of Indianas or some of these teams, a UNLV potentially in 25, or an Illinois in 25, where we allow ourselves to kind of get outside of ourselves, even though we know anything can happen year over year. The way that you can rebuild and redo rosters and have a key acquisition here, a key acquisition there, a late departure here, a late departure there, we still will allow ourselves to get worked up in the off season or go back and lament on what could have been instead of just taking the body of work that we've seen happen. And clearly anything can happen in year over year in college football. We still kind of let that set our moods. Don't let it. You don't have to have any preconceived notions about the off season except staying right in the moment. Because if nothing else that we've proven this year in college football, and you can use Ohio State after losing to Michigan or Notre Dame after losing to Northern Illinois, the more we think we know, the less we probably do, especially if you're trying to forecast in the off season. Don't do it to yourselves. Enjoy the ride. It's another episode of Benning Bites.
A Hurrdat Sports Network production.